And the Bible doesn't necessarily give me a blueprint for technical policy detail, but it does tell me as a Christian that there is a moral imperative to allow the foreigner, the stranger, admittance to culture and to life. We are to be voice in God's heart for everybody. So I absolutely believe that we've got to care. Now, definitions can get confusing around asylum seekers, refugees, and economic migration. They're different, but as Christians, I feel our welcome should not be any less. We should not walk into a culture war trap of good migrant, bad migrant. The overriding command through scripture, and I don't see any room on this, is to provide hospitality and to care for those who are the stranger. And that has to be at the forefront of our mind. The Bible places emphasis on dignity and worth of individuals, commanding us to show that hospitality and friendship. It reminds us that I was once a stranger in a foreign land, and it calls us to treat people as if they were our own. So with this in mind, we must look for policy that is compassionate and just. It recognizes complexity, yet treats people with dignity that we all deserve. We often neglect to speak of the tremendous contribution migrants and refugees bring to our economy and wider society. This has been demonstrated clearly, and it's heightened our reliance on essential workers and invaluable skills that migrants often bring to our workforce, such as health and social care and hospitality. But it's clear we do not simply benefit from fiscal contribution alone, but also gifts, talents, and involvement in our shared life together. Today, more people than ever live in a country that's not the one they were born in. The UN estimates 79.5 million people have been displaced from their home. But these are people who have skills and talents and motivations and should be allowed to contribute and should be allowed a country in which they can have safety. UK applications for asylum were actually down. So all the media coverage was saying, you know, everybody's coming in, invaders, blah, blah, blah. That's not the truth. So from the year to March 2021, asylum applications were down 24%. We only resettled 353 people in the UK. There are fewer people coming to the UK right now for protection. The reality is that these asylum seekers, around 60 to 70% are often genuine, and they're stuck in a queue to get into another queue to have their claim decided. So what are we doing about that? Do we leave them in unsafe accommodation with very little financial support, unable to move and get on with their lives for months or years, adding to trauma that they have been through? What do we do about this? My boss, a happier story other than the letters that she received, happier story was she had a guy come into her office who was very down and out. He was talking about his asylum claim. He looks really traumatic, really drawn. And that had been a couple of years ago. But then she texted me the other day to say, you'll never guess who's in my house doing my construction work for me. And it was this guy that had gone through the asylum process. He'd been accepted. He now has refugee status and he's able to work. And he was basically decorating my boss's house. So here he'd sat in her office in Manchester, talked through his asylum claim, had delays, was very traumatized, and then now has a place of safety. He's working, he has dignity, and he's a completely different character. That's why we care, surely, because we want to give people opportunity, we want to give people dignity. But at the Lord's table, any question of status or legality is superseded by the embrace of family and friends and fellow believers. The recognition of our sinfulness and of the forgiveness of God should move Christian attitudes towards outsiders in need, even those we know might be undocumented. This does not solve the legal issue or any policy really, but it should impact our direction of conversation in ways that resonate with Christian practice. You know, we welcome, because the gospel, quite frankly, would not exist if it were not for migration. It is our story. It is humanity's story. We need to get back to putting ourselves at the center and then going back again to putting Jesus at the center and saying, how do we care from there? This is our story. Can a Christian really have a stance on immigration that ignores the vast material in both testaments concerning the outsider and be reduced to just a simple squabbling of legal standing? I believe that we absolutely should care. We should welcome the poor and the needy and practice hospitality, and should we create situations of dignity and situations of integration. It is not our job to find excuses. And it is not our job to shirk from our international and moral obligations, no matter how hard that is.
What's really key is getting the church back doing their job and helping refugees. So I think another major solution is just increasing the churches and Christians' exposure to refugees and immigrants. Exposure, I believe, leads to friendship, and friendship leads to advocacy. Every evangelical church in America needs to have a refugee and immigrant outreach ministry. That's one of the challenges to the church, is that every church needs to have some ministry that reaches out to refugees and immigrants. You know, the evangelical church in America has had a huge passion for evangelism. They spend thousands and thousands of dollars supporting missionaries overseas. But the reality is that missions has come to our doorsteps. And there are refugees and immigrants who you have missionaries ministering to them overseas, but they're on your doorstep. So we need to be encouraging the church to reach out to refugees and immigrants here on their doorstep and sharing, not just sharing the good news, but being the good news to people. When I was the refugee resettlement director in Wheaton, Illinois, we were able to achieve a 90% church sponsorship rate for refugee families that were coming in. So of all the refugee families that came in, I think we were resettling about 1,000 people in a year. 90% were sponsored, had a church sponsor that was committed to helping them for up to a year. And there was just, I have so many stories of amazing transformation that happened in the life of the refugee families and the lives of the church members who were exposed to refugee families. From 1996 to 2004, I had the privilege to meet and serve hundreds of refugees from all over the world, and when I worked for World Relief. But my life was changed for the better because of a friendship with a Bosnian Muslim family who opened up their lives to a 21-year-old kid and taught me about life, loss, forgiveness. This family I've stayed close to for over 25 years. And they love my family. They love America. They're model US citizens. And here's their quick story about their story of courage and perseverance. This family had a very good life in Bosnia. They lived in West Bosnia. They worked in one of the largest food processing plants in ex-Yugoslavia. They were in the process of building a new house. They had 2 children. They were taking vacations on the Croatian coast every year. They had a great life. But during the war in Bosnia, they were forced out of their town called Velika Kladuša, and they had to live on a hillside in Croatia for almost a year, a place called Kuplensko. They were living in a refugee camp in Croatia for about a year. And in that refugee camp, they were interviewed by the UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees, and they were approved to come to the United States as refugees. And they were chosen to be resettled in Chicago. And that's where I met them, in a 1-bedroom, tiny apartment on the north side of Chicago. It was the parents, the 2 children, and 3 other cousins were living in a 1-bedroom, tiny apartment in Chicago. And they worked very, very hard when they got here. The mother was working in a hotel in downtown Chicago, cleaning 16 rooms a day as a housekeeper. The father was working as a janitor outside of a building downtown. And their hope was for their kids. They were able to get citizenship after 5 years. They got better jobs. Their English got better. Their daughter ended up being the valedictorian at her high school. She became a college graduate. They have grandchildren now. They've bought 2 houses. The parents have bought 2 houses. Each of their kids now own a house and have children of their own. And these examples of people like my friends, the Begovic family, this is the normal story for refugees that come to the United States. This is not the exception. This is a normal story. And my challenge to America is, are we going to fail the great American experiment by locking out future citizens like this Bosnian family? Shutting the doors on refugees will not make America great. It denies our history. And for followers of Jesus, it denies our faith.
So here are a few pictures of the reality that Palestinian people had to go through, from being a flourished community in Palestinian cities to refugees scattered in the Middle East and around the globe. But although that experience that was painful, Palestinians didn't forget their homeland. You see in the top left on the screen, this old man holds a key. That key is his house key in his village where he lived or forced to leave in 1948. Many of the Palestinian refugees still have their houses keys in their homes in 1948 or pre-1948. And actually, new generations inherit that key to be reminded that they have home, and one day they will go back to that home. And you see on the right, on the left hand, a picture of me and my grandmother. My grandmother was displaced from Jaffa in 1948 when she was a teen. The Israeli Zionist militia attacked Jaffa in 1948, and she had to flee to Gaza on a boat with her mother, stepmother actually, and her brothers and sisters. And she lived her whole life as a refugee. Currently, she lives in the States, in Los Angeles, and I had a chance to visit her in 2018. And she shared with me her story of being or living in Jaffa for her childhood, and then had to be displaced to Gaza. My grandmother didn't get the right, or still don't have the right by the Israeli government, to return to her home. In fact, one of my cousins tried to go and take picture with his children in the front of her home in Jaffa, which is occupied by settler Israelis. But they called the police on, because even to have a memory of that place is an issue for Israeli settlers. But the issue of the Palestinian refugees is not only about 1948. The Israeli settler colonialism continues to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian land from its indigenous people. What you've seen on the news for the last 2 weeks about Gaza, it's a continuation of the Israeli expulsion and ethnic cleansing of Palestinian people all over the land. And because of the Israeli aggression that destroyed residential buildings, whole neighborhoods, killed families. Actually, there is about, I think, 12 families that the whole family deleted from the civilian record in Gaza because the Israeli airstrike killed the whole family. That's what we call genocide, in fact. But beside the killing, the destruction, thousands of Palestinians, maybe around 30,000 Palestinians, were again displaced. And by the way, Gaza, the Gazan population, 70% of it is refugees. So imagine those people who experienced displacement in 1948, and again, Israel continues to displace them even in their refugee camps. Palestinian refugee crisis is in fact an ethnic cleansing, an ethical and theological issue, because many evangelicals around the globe are blindly supporting the Zionism, the Zionist agenda, which we call Christian Zionism, and the displacement, the killing of the Palestinian people. And I believe that it's our responsibility as a church to take that responsibility on this issue, that we caused it to some point because of our interpretations, because of our belief about Israel and confusing the colonial state of Israel with biblical Israel. And of course, confusing Jewishness with Zionism and Jewishness with Israel.
They were overwhelmed by everything what was happening here. And they said, these are the Christians that they just are here to help us. And I was so touched by that comment, like if I would say one word, they were overwhelmed by goodness today. And I think right now we are expecting two more buses, and I think more than more than 1,500 people, I think, we serve today. Yes.
I was working as a volunteer in a hospital, and one Roma child was brought in. And that image stays with me, I think will stay with me for the rest of my life. When was brought in, the only thing that you could see in the room was the frustration. Frustration that it's another child, it's a Roma child, that he's dirty, that he is full of lies, what we are about to do about him, how we will touch him, what we will do. So looking at this image, I just suddenly I had this revelation, and I said, I would like to wash him. I have to say, when I put the child in water, that water became black because he was so full of lies, that water was full of lies. And in that moment, I said, how in the world, what type of people are we that we don't see a child, we just see him a gypsy? Because that is how we are in real life. We don't see people, we just see them by their name, by the group that they represent, in a way that's safe for us because doesn't make us interact with them or doesn't make us understand them. But when you really see the person, when God really opens your eyes to see the pain and to see the suffering, I will have to tell you that everything about you changes. And that is what happened to me. And I said I will not want to be ignorant anymore. And I was praying after that a lot that God will give me love for the people around me. And that brings me back to the moment when we, as a team, we entered in at the border with Hungary in Serbia. And we met a group of people there, and we start giving out packages, just short packages and water. And one person came to me and he said one thing that really stuck with me. He said, we've been here for 2.5 days. People that just came and gave us stuff. They just gave us stuff. But none of them actually asked me how I am doing or actually smiled at me. You are the first person that actually looks into my eyes and smiles at me. And I felt so, my heart just broke. My heart just broke because our world is going in a wrong direction. And people need us. This person said, I just need a simple conversation. I've been in awful situation, treated, mistreated, put aside, living in camps, sleeping on a bench, walking a lot of distances. I just need a simple conversation. When we are talking about refugee or the Roma people or even the other that it's next to us, that it's different maybe politically or being part of a different group of another group or whatever difference it is, we just have to put aside the differences and really understand the person in that moment and look at him, into his eyes. I think many times we forget to be human. But if I think about similarities or differences, I really thought that living in unhealthy situation, both of the groups are living, not knowing what the next day will be like, not knowing how you are waking up because you are living in a camp. I was thinking, isn't so interesting that all this called the concentration camp, the gypsy camp, the refugee camp, it just that word, that stigma has such a weight and it's so hard on people. when we talk about camps, putting people in a place that we decide and we feel that they deserve to be there.
I just said goodbye to two wonderful people. They came and they asked me for coffee. And we're just sorry we didn't think about that. You know, they're just normal people, beautiful people. They studied English literature and they left their families back there. I honestly don't know what the heck is going on here. It's such a mess. It's a lot of pain. It's a lot of drama. I saw a 1 month, 2 months old baby, and I was wondering what is this guy doing here in the middle of this mess, this dirt. We can only pray that the finger of God will touch them.
We all got used by now with the waves of people crossing our borders. The civilized West learned fast, and now the crowds of refugees were gathered in ghettos. All of this spread around Europe. Trains came on one side, unloaded their cargo like herds under the supervision of plenty of police. Line up, long queues, do some preliminary papers, move to another tent, get some clothes quickly, then some food and some medical attention if needed, and then back on yet another overpopulated train and continue the trip deeper into the old continent. I remember well that the day we arrived, we were kept for hours outside the camp at the gates in the wet cold of the Croatian winter. They needed all the help they could get, but they couldn't understand what was a mottled group like ours, Americans, Romanians, we even had one Palestinian with us and a few Croatians. What were we doing in that godforsaken place under that thick fog? We found ourselves in a courtyard, which was guarded by the saddest Christmas tree I have ever seen. We were immediately assigned to build 2 shelters we ended up paying for with the help of many friends from around the world. The medical team needed a warm place, not a tent, where to receive the nursing mothers from amongst the refugees. So that is what we did for the next week. Whenever we had a break, we would go to the fence and watch the almost continuous flux of refugees. Yes, you heard me well. You needed yet another set of approvals to go beyond yet another fence and be in close contact with the refugees. I remember one of these escapades, Conrad, my brother and friend for a lifetime. So Conrad and I stopped from carrying boxes of clothes and went in the tent where the refugees were looking for stuff that would fit them. Remember, it was wet and cold, and some of these people didn't even know that winter existed. So we handed out many clothes. And one time, as I was turning around to look for more stuff in one of the boxes, I saw Conrad, quiet, because of the language barrier, on his knees, helping a little girl put on a new pair of shoes. He was crying. And in my mind and soul, all of a sudden bloomed a metaphor. Here we were, right before Christmas, building a place for nursing mothers for the sake of the one whose mom didn't have a proper place to nurse him, and for the sake of some people who did not even believe in Christmas. And it was then I understood more than ever before how Jesus changed the paradigm when he was asked, "Who is my neighbor so that I love him?" And Jesus said, "Which one do you think was a neighbor to the man?" Was a neighbor to the man. So me personally, at that time, looking around, I saw strangers, outcasts, refugees, cold and wet and hungry and scared. I then saw the serious military guard at the gate. I saw the cook mixing in a huge pot of beans and sausages, preparing our lunch. I saw our new friend, the lesbian young lady from the Red Cross. I saw a group of men smoking in the rain. And I understood that to this I must be a neighbor, and that I'm called to love them all.
It was, during the night, and it was really cold and bad situation. And when we went in the front of boat, that guy, he put the boat in the water, and some of us, they didn't know how to swim. So that was first problem. And another one was we saw so many people like as a refugee, and they were just forced in a bigger boat, which is it's for 20 people, but it was forced, and like to be full of 30, 40, or some of them 50 people, around 50 people. And we were just, I can say God, I cannot say lucky, because I know God was just protecting us. And we were just 7 people in a small boat. It wasn't good boat. It was like plastic. And on that way, on the sea, we saw so many people died. We saw the boat were just running like in the water, and kids, and like so many people, they died. And we were just 3 hours and 30 minutes, we were just trying not to die, because water was coming in our boat, and we were just trying to survive somehow. And we were just all the time praying, because it was really tough way, like it, we didn't know we will be live or we will be dead. So when we get to Greece, to the island, I don't know, like it was the name, it was Kos. We were so happy, and we thought everything will be great, but it wasn't like that. And we had a many bad experience. So when I went to Austria, they deported us to Croatia again. We were 3 brothers, and they say, you are not family. So that brother, older brother, he was like a father for us, because we put everything behind, our family, our father and mother, and he was everything to us. So they deported us again to Croatia, after learning everything, language, and to finding friend, and to finding church. It's really hard. You start not from 0, you start from minus 100 maybe, because you don't know the people, you don't know the culture, you don't know the language, you don't have any friend, and you have to start from the beginning. And people are looking at you like you are terrorist. They're not looking at you like a human. Even you cannot talk. After 5-6 years I'm living in Europe, and 5 years in Croatia, I don't have a good feeling to talk in my language with mobile phone. Wherever I go, in a bus, or in a bus, in a elevator, or wherever I saw another people, even I'm talking with my brother or with mobile phone, I don't talk in my language, because I see they are looking at us really strangely, like they are thinking who we are. So still after 5 years being in Croatia, and being in newspaper and TV, and as a candidate for Olympic Games, and being in so many tournaments, being coach for national team, and getting some 8 European medals for Croatia, still I don't have that feeling. Still I'm a refugee, I can say.
To finalize with this one, because this is happening right now, it's happening in Canary Island. Actually, it was not in the news because COVID, took over. And then in 2020, more than 20,000 migrants, refugees, people coming from Mali, Sierra Leone, Gambia, to Canary Island. Actually, this is the most dangerous route to come to Europe, because as you know, it's very difficult for people now to go to Libya, from Libya to Lampedusa, or from Turkey to Lesbos, because Frontex and the Europeans, we are doing a very good job. The Europe is only for Europeans, right? So basically, we close the Mediterranean. So now there is this very dangerous route in the Atlantic to go to Canary Island. Canary Island, as you know, is very close to Africa, way more close than to Spain, but it's a Spanish land. So somehow they want to go there. This is the story of a church who actually opened the floor of the church, and actually the Spanish government, together with the Red Cross, been working very close with them. It's a huge church. They have 1,000 members. And now the church become a welcome center. And actually, during times of COVID, they've been using this as a place where they welcome and host the refugees. And basically, the volunteer people from the church are helping them with Spanish lessons and helping them in the church, actually, that now is basically a refugee center. This is in Fuerteventura, one of the small islands in Canarias. So we do have Christians who are we are doing this. But my question, I've seen that many times when there is a crisis, when we need that, when we actually see people coming. But then when they live in our country, when they live in my country, where they live in the place where I live, do we still practice hospitality? And I think it's like if we welcome the stranger, we also need to practice hospitality in the longer term. We actually need to have some responsibility to build this hospitality and community. And I think there is hope, not to lose hope. That was something that a Syrian lady told me in the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. And I think we have hope not to lose hope if we practice hospitality. But if we don't practice hospitality and give a good example as Christians, maybe we should reflect about that we should be a good example, because many times in the Bible that we should welcome the stranger.
It's serious to any Orthodox treatment of Scripture that we welcome refugees and immigrants. Anything else is ethnocentric, it's racist, and at worst, it's born of hell. But I also just want to say, from a practical standpoint, our entire economy rests on the back of the cheap labor we rely on from immigrants from Central and South America, and that our economy would collapse without undocumented labor. This is well known. You can't touch anything in our grocery stores that has not first been touched by undocumented labor or people who are in waiting status for citizenship who are working in agriculture in the United States. Additionally, from a practical standpoint, the employment rate of people from Central and South America is 93% in our country, which is way higher than it is for white people. Undocumented immigrants have a substantially lower crime rate than native-born citizens and legal immigrants across a range of felony offenses. Relative to undocumented immigrants, US-born citizens are over 2 times more likely to be arrested for violent crimes, 2.5 times more likely to be arrested for drug crimes, and 4 times more likely to be arrested for property crimes. In World War II, we had an opportunity to take people who were trying to get out of Germany, to take Jewish people who were fleeing persecution. We could have took thousands of people, and we said no. And we still haven't learned our lesson. And that would have been nothing but a blessing for this country. And we have years of experience to show us that taking in refugees and immigrants has been nothing but a blessing for this country. You know, I hope that Christians will take a moment not only to consider Jesus' refugee status, to consider what Jesus said about refugees, but to imagine, what if we were in this position? How would we feel if we had nothing, if war came to our doorstep the way it has in other countries, and we don't think it because we think we're above it, I think, and we needed to be refugees somewhere and they said no. You know, we have to think, how would we want others to treat us? How do we want to think about our neighbor?
One of my favorite novelists, Fyodor Dostoevsky, said in one of his first novels ever, titled Poor People, "What is honor, my dear, when you have nothing to eat?" How true is this when we see people who gave up honor because of desperation and hunger in the midst of humanitarian crisis or natural disasters or wars or alienation that happens in their own societies, as we've heard about Palestinians and Roma communities and others, or just sheer inability to survive in a place where they cannot feed their children, and because of those reasons feel that they will take the journey that is treacherous, that is dangerous, that could cost them life in order to create an opportunity. So a story of the Good Samaritan is given to us to help us understand what Leonard Boff calls a new way to be a Christian. Luke 10, and in that passage, The victim in the parable has fallen prey to circumstances beyond his control, and we find that victim half dead on the road between Jerusalem and Jericho. I've been on that road. The starting point is a person here who is in great need, the distant person that we know nothing about. What do we know about that person who is robbed, banged up, beaten up, and left half dead on the side of the road? Nothing from the beginning to the end. The usually excluded person, the ignored person. The imagery of the parable, the neighborly responsibility begins with the person or persons who have fallen prey to circumstances of misfortune, the stranger, the unfortunate, the unknown, the poor. Often in the Old Testament, the triad of these most vulnerable people is phrased over and over and over again. How? The widow, the orphan, and the alien, the immigrant, the person who does not belong, and yet is invited to belong. If in order to define our responsibilities, we start with ourselves, then we shall be just like the Pharisee and the lawyer in the parable. We shall begin by asking, and who is my neighbor? So by such an inappropriate question, we mean, whom shall I love as a good Christian, and whom I could exclude from loving? However, you see, mission seen in such a way becomes only an extension of oneself. But Jesus twists this question. The lawyer's question was, in a nutshell, what can reasonably be demanded of me? What is the minimum I can be expected to do? How can I define my neighbor in such a way as someone only who is closest to me? Is it possible that I can rule out the foreigner in the command, love your neighbor, and just draw a line to the persons of my national origin or my immediate proximity? And Jesus with this parable does not answer the question of selectivity. He utterly ignores the question. And therefore, whom should I love or whom I could choose to ignore to love? The lawyer asks, what are the limits which God sets to the love he would have a person show to another human being? Jesus answered in the parable that love asks not for the limit, but for the opportunity. We ask for limits. We continue to ask questions of exclusion and embrace. Whom to exclude and whom to embrace? Who should be the object of our compassion? However, Jesus creates another question of his own. Who is the neighbor of the person in need? That's the question Jesus is asking and answering. The question is not who is our neighbor. This is a twisted and limited question. The question is who is the neighbor to the victim of the oppression, or ultimately not who is my neighbor, but whose neighbor am I? In his excellent book, The Parable of Jesus, Joachim Jeremias summarizes this part in the following way. I quote, while the scribe's question in verse 29 concerned the object of the love, who must I treat as a friend? Jesus in verse 36 asks about the subject of the love, who acted as a friend. The scribe is thinking of himself when he asks, what is the limit of my responsibility? Jesus says to him, think of the sufferer. Put yourself in his place. Consider who needs help from me. Then you will see that love's demand knows no limit. While the friend is certainly in the first place his fellow countryman, yet the meaning of the term rea is not limited to that. The example of the despised half-breed, as Samaritans were regarded by the Jews of that time, was intended to teach him that no human being was beyond the range of his charity. And the answer that Jesus gives, the good neighbor is the one who approaches that victim with compassion, Luke 10:37. The neighbor then is someone who has burst the bonds of self and stooped, bent down towards the abundant other, towards the child that needed those shoes. In the parable, the neighbor was the Good Samaritan. Now, Samaritans were regarded by Jesus' people not as good at all. However, from this moment forward, the Samaritan has always had the epithet good, despite the fact that he did not belong to the rank of orthodoxy, that he did not represent what the priest and the Levite represented, that orthodoxy that failed to fill the most important element of the law, which is mercy. For Jesus, our neighbor is anyone to whom I draw near, and I ought to draw near to all women and men, particularly the poor, the plundered, whom I meet along the pathway of my journey between Jerusalem and Jericho, my journey on earth. The neighbor is not an attractive person. He's covered with blood, naked, half dead. Jesus finishes his story with sober words, go and do likewise. In the language of James, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourself, do what it says. It seems to me that we are invited to respond to tragedies and huge needs of the world that we inhabit, the world that has many marginal and vulnerable that we hear about, unable to take care of themselves on the side of the road going to Jericho. If only we could not ask too many times, who is my neighbor, trying to pacify our conscience of doing nothing for the widow, the orphan, and the alien in our midst, but instead ask, whose neighbor am I? Who is the person in the need? It is that kind of question, seems to me, that has been suggested throughout the biblical texts, whether it's Exodus, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, or Matthew, or Hebrews 13. And so I pray that, I hope that we could indeed follow that kind of advice to become neighbors. And the neighbors are not just those that are closest to us, that we know by name, that are part of our church or our nationhood, but are those that are most vulnerable, most marginal, most in need.
This is just one bus after the other. The groups of, I would say, groups of 50 and 100 people are constantly coming. And so we have bought some of the stuff that might give them some energy, some juices, some water, some croissants and bananas they love very much, and a number of other little things, like something they can eat quickly, stop for a few moments, eat quickly, or eat as they walk. Here we have a team from Belgrade and from Novi Sad, and us who have come from Romania, from Serbia, from Croatia, from Israel, from USA, to help those people. We have no political agenda. We have no political interests. Our only interest is to be representatives of Jesus, to put it like this, representatives of Jesus, who simply do what Jesus says, whatever you did to the least of mine brother, or to the least of those, you have done to me. When I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. When I was a stranger, you let me into your home. When I was in prison, you visited me. And we can go on and probably say, when I was a refugee, you treated me well. So here we are witnessing probably several buses have come at this moment. Several buses have come out this moment. And then our team has about 10 people today. We have joined forces with a couple of other groups here, and we are just one team at this moment.
Add a prayer from a friend of mine, Walter Brueggemann, somebody who has continued to influence me and I'll shorten it just for the last 3 paragraphs of his prayer. Our Charter of Entitlement. Brueggemann says, we have and treasure all the signs of entitlement, all the props of affluence, all the symbols of well-being. How peculiar that we have it all and worry about immigrants who might acquire some small part of our legacy. In this moment of candor before you, we step into that gap in our life between assured entitlement and the threat of immigrants, between our indulgence of our children and the violence that mostly lacks shame. Move us by your hovering that we may come to ourselves, that we may notice the ways in which we are far from home, that we may reckon how we have betrayed ourselves for quick fixes, Give us the capacity to return to you, to be welcome home, to be forgiven. As people of entitlement and violence, we converge with immigrants. We learn together how deeply in need we are. Receive us and move us that we may accept your welcome to newness. Return us to innocence even while we are frightened. Exhibit to us your great simplicity among our complex habits. Call us at last by our right names because we are yours.